Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is David Rohde, who's an executive editor of The New Yorker and a former reporter for Reuters, The New York Times, and the Christian Science Monitor. He won his first Pulitzer Prize for a series in the Christian Science Monitor that helped uncover the Srebrenica massacre in Bosnia, which formed the basis of his book Endgame, The Betrayal and Fall of Srebrenica. And he won his second Pulitzer in 2009 as part of the New York Times team covering Afghanistan and Pakistan. And he's the co-author of A Rope and a Prayer, which is about his experience being kidnapped by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And his latest book is In Deep, the FBI, the CIA, and the Truth About America's Deep State. Welcome to Background Briefing, David Rohde.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Well, thanks for joining us. And David, you're uniquely positioned of having been a prisoner of the Taliban, and I'm sure while you were captured, you got to know them, or at least understand them to some extent. And your latest book, In Deep, the FBI, the CIA, and the Truth About America's Deep State, that is, there's now a major collision between President Trump and what he calls the deep state, where he's denying that he was briefed on the information that the Russian GRU, or a unit of the Russian GRU, were paying bounties to Taliban and other Islamists in Afghanistan to kill Americans. So the clash is on, right, between President Trump and what he calls the deep state. And how do you see this thing playing out?
It's interesting. This seems to have gained more traction than past clashes with the intelligence community because, this is about hunting American soldiers for cash, and with the direct involvement of Russia. So it has more resonance than any clash I've seen between the intelligence community and President Trump since Trump took office.
Well, it would probably extend to the Pentagon, wouldn't it? One would think that if this is proven, the rank and file in the military are not going to be too happy with their commander-in-chief.
Yes. Totally. And this is a core, it's fine when he has a summit with Kim Jong-un and, wants to have a big press conference. But this is the death of American soldiers. This is, it's fine if he wants to go to Helsinki and publicly sort of, be chummy with Vladimir Putin. But again, this is Vladimir Putin funding the killing of American soldiers. So it's different, and it's a whole new level.
But it seems that the Russians, it's not difficult to understand that the Russians, and in particular Putin, may have a motive here. There may be an element of payback. Putin's close friend, Prigozhin, the so-called Putin chef, who not only was behind the internet trolling out of the company that he controlled in St. Petersburg that were behind the hacks of the DNC and WikiLeaks and all of what happened during the 2016 election, but he runs this mercenary army called the Wagner Brigade, and they had a serious clash with the U.S. military along with the Syrians. They attacked an American post in Syria, and they got really badly beaten and suffered a lot of casualties. So I don't know whether that's an element, but also the fact that the Mujahideen, which the U.S. armed and finance, drove the Soviets out of Afghanistan. Is that still a sort of wound? In other words, are those two possibilities combined? Did they go to some extent to explain perhaps what the Russian motives might be in this?
Yes, and I think that, this is a classic intelligence operation. We spent billions of dollars, trying to get Afghan jihadists to kill Russian soldiers, during the Cold War, as you just said. So it is payback. And it's also, part, I think, of Putin's very consistent strategy to diminish the standing of the United States around the world. To defeat the American military in Afghanistan is a big plus for Putin. It reduces the influence of the United States. And so this is a completely logical operation. And, it helps the Taliban, it helps Putin. It weakens the standing of the United States, so it makes sense to me that this would be happening.
And again, I'm speaking with David Rohde, who's an executive editor of The New Yorker and a former reporter for Reuters, The New York Times, and the Christian Science Monitor. He won his first Pulitzer Prize for a series in the Christian Science Monitor that helped uncover the Srebrenica massacre in Bosnia, which formed the basis of his book Endgame, The Betrayal and Fall of Srebrenica, and he won his second Pulitzer Prize in 2009 as part of the New York Times team covering Afghanistan and Pakistan. And he's the co-author of A Rope and a Prayer, which is about his experience being kidnapped by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And his latest book is In Deep, the FBI, the CIA, and the Truth About America's Deep State. But on the surface, David, you would think that you wouldn't have to bribe the Taliban to kill Americans. They're pretty highly motivated to do that, are they not?
Well, there's a great mix of forces in Afghanistan who, there are criminal elements in Afghanistan that have worked with the Taliban for money. They've kidnapped Westerners and then handed them over to the Taliban for profit. That wasn't the case in my kidnapping many years ago. So that it would make sense that they would offer money. And it's another incentive. I think the Taliban, in a way, are sort of approaching winning the war. And so this financial incentive, could cause some Taliban to take risks and mount operations focused on killing Americans instead of Afghan security forces because they could make more money from it.
Well, that seems to be the case with the 3 Marines that were killed outside of Bagram Air Base when a vehicle laden with explosives ran into their truck. And apparently there is some evidence that the Taliban commanders may have hired a couple of criminals to do this, a local network of criminals. Is there any, do you think that that's going to emerge? Because I imagine with the president now being accused of sitting on information that should have been acted on right away, the next of kin of these 3 Marines must be asking some serious questions at this moment.
Yeah, and there's just a piece in the New York Times now saying that there's additional evidence of financial transactions, transfers of money that went into a Taliban-linked account. And so that is an example of an attack that really wouldn't happen at this sort of stage of the war. There's been many car bombs that have killed U.S. troops in and around Kabul. So that's an expensive. That's a very large bomb that's got to penetrate an American armored vehicle. So the pattern here, it seems clear to me. I find all this highly, highly credible. And then the other interesting thing it shows is how the way Trump consumes intelligence. There's the debate also where the intelligence community says that this was presented to him in writing. Trump says he didn't see that. This goes at this fact that President Trump does not read the intelligence briefings he's given. He doesn't read memos and reports regarding all kinds of policy issues, but definitely he's not, reading the presidential daily brief. He prefers an oral presentation. So it fits everything I've heard that this would be something that was written, a document, but that Trump would not, actually look at it. And again, it could emerge that he was told orally as well, but all these kind of failings or critiques, I should say, of the Trump presidency, easy on Putin, not absorbing intelligence, dismissing the advice and information of experts, are all coming together in this one scandal.
Well, apparently this written report in the presidential daily briefing took place on February the 27th. That's according to the New York Times. And also, the former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who has a book out now, he's now said that he did, in fact, orally brief the president on this. And apparently that was one of the things that was cut out of his book because it was considered classified information. So Bolton is not able to give any details, but he apparently has verified that he actually did brief Trump and told him about the Russians paying the Taliban to kill Americans. Now, what about other Islamists? Is it possible? I mean, you've got the guy that kidnapped you, his network, right? Haqqani.
Yes.
Are they freelancers? How do they fit into the kind of pantheon of Afghan terrorism?
They are possibly a group that are very loyal to the Taliban and very committed jihadists. They're also extremely lethal in what they do and very effective. They also are motivated by money. That was part of the kidnapping network they ran that involved me. They had Bo Bergdahl, the American soldier who was held for 5 years, and various American aid workers and other journalists that they've kidnapped as well. So, yes, the Haqqanis might have been interested in doing this for money. And again, it shows the kind of depth, I think, of intelligence that the U.S. has at this point after so many years in Afghanistan, that they're able to trace individual financial transactions to these kinds of attacks. But it's the broader problem is the signaling to adversaries that Donald Trump, will not push back if challenged. The gentle treatment of President Xi of China, asking him for help, according to Bolton, if you believe John Bolton, asking China to buy American agricultural products, that President Trump, asked the Chinese leader that to help him win re-election. Trump, according to Bolton, offering President Erdogan of Turkey to have a criminal prosecution that could embarrass Erdogan, go away. It's a pattern, and the reason I think it's getting more traction this summer is just the sense of a president who's focused on himself more than on the lives and livelihoods of average Americans.
So, isn't there a broader strategy on the part of the Russians to just sort of make life difficult for us in Afghanistan? What would their strategic goals be here? I mean, apparently they were trying to interfere with the Afghan-US peace talks and to try and derail them. What would their motive be then in wanting perpetual chaos? Or we know to some extent that seems to be the motive of the Pakistanis, who all along have stabbed the US in the back. They basically want the Taliban to take over. So are the Pakistanis and the Russians co-conspirators, or are they on the same page strategically?
They're definitely on the same page strategically. I think the Russians, see the American military defeat in Afghanistan, a huge blow to American prestige, revenge for the Soviets' own failure in Afghanistan, which was a huge blow to Soviet prestige. And then the Pakistani military and Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI, has been determined to have a Taliban-led regime in Kabul. They see the current government of Ashraf Ghani and the previous government of Hamid Karzai as sort of being aligned with India, Pakistan's arch rival. So all of this makes sense. All of this shows why all these years in Afghanistan, in some sense, the U.S. effort has been doomed. As long as Pakistan would shelter Taliban militants, there was no way the U.S. could defeat them. They would just hide in their safe areas inside Pakistan's borders.
And the people that kidnapped you, the Haqqani network, aren't they in tight with the ISI?
Yes, there's a long history of a relationship between the two of them. It varies from that the Pakistanis sort of seem to look the other way. When I was held captive, we were actually held in houses that were, a mile or two from Pakistani military bases. And essentially, this is in the tribal areas of Pakistan up in the mountains near the border with Afghanistan. The Taliban and the Haqqani network sort of operated their own mini-state up in that area. There were Pakistani garrisons, but the Pakistani military forces would rarely come off them. And the schools, there were even like road, there were crews repairing roads. All of that was sort of run by the Taliban up in the tribal areas, and they weren't challenged very aggressively by the Pakistanis. There's other allegations that the ISI funnels them money and weapons as well. People disagree on that, but that sanctuary that the Taliban has enjoyed in Pakistan, I think, was one of the single most important reasons that the Taliban have been able to survive and, in essence, defeat the United States in Afghanistan.
Well, just in the last couple of minutes there, of course, there's a new player in Afghanistan added to this mix of Haqqanis, freelancers, and the Taliban, and that's the Islamic State. And apparently one of the promises that the Taliban have made in this deal that's supposedly doing with the United States is that they will neutralize or take care of the Islamic State. Is that realistic?
I honestly don't know. I haven't been in Afghanistan in many years since I was kidnapped, to be honest. I think it's difficult for any government in Kabul to control the whole country. It's been this way for centuries. So, I do think, and you've hit on, this is the central question, do the Taliban simply want to control Afghanistan, or are they interested in international jihad? My captors told me they were not they only cared about Afghanistan. They just wanted foreign troops out of Afghanistan. But this is the risk. I want the conflict to end. I want the peace agreement to work. If the Taliban would moderate and counter the Islamic State and there'd be stability in Afghanistan, that would be great for the country after all these years of suffering. But it's unclear that if the Taliban can control the country and effectively counter the Islamic State. It's just a tragic situation.
And just in closing, how do you see this scandal brewing here in the United States?
I think it damages Trump politically. I think it comes with a series of things. I mean, the coronavirus has damaged him. This eagerness to, it seems, to use U.S. troops on the streets of American cities, and it's back to questions about Donald Trump's competence. And, is Donald Trump's incompetence costing American lives? You have 100,000 Americans dead from the coronavirus. Now you have a president ignoring intelligence, showing that American troops are being killed, and it's alleged incompetence costing American lives. That theme is very damaging, I think, to the president politically.
But doesn't the T word come up? Treason?
Yes, that's a possibility. We're so close to an election. I don't see that happening. But I don't know. I mean, this is the whole Putin question. But yes, all the questions about collusion and why he's so deferential to Putin are being raised again. But the difference is Americans are dying this time.
Well, David Rohde, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much.
And again, I've been speaking with David Rohde, who's an executive editor of The New Yorker and a former reporter for Reuters, The New York Times, and the Christian Science Monitor. He won his first Pulitzer Prize for a series in the Christian Science Monitor that helped uncover the Srebrenica massacre in Bosnia, which formed the basis of his book Endgame, The Betrayal and Fall of Srebrenica. And he won his second Pulitzer Prize in 2009 as part of the New York Times team covering Afghanistan and Pakistan. And he's the co-author of A Rope and a Prayer, which is about his experience being kidnapped by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And his latest book is In Deep, the FBI, the CIA, and the Truth About America's Deep State. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into the 5-4 Supreme Court decision to have state funds go